The palace at night was a world apart from its daytime grandeur. By day, the sun's rays danced off the gold leaf decorations, and the halls were filled with chatter and laughter. But by night, those same halls turned silent, filled with a sense of stillness that felt almost suffocating. Shadows stretched long under the moon's silvery gaze, and the only sound was the steady ticking of the grand clock in the entrance hall. I was alone in that silence, patrolling the royal corridors as the palace's night guard, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I had grown used to the solitude, the way the empty halls seemed to press in around me. But lately something had changed. It began a few weeks ago at precisely 3 a.m. every night. The lights in the royal apartment's corridor started flickering. Not just a random flicker, but a steady, pulsing rhythm that made my skin crawl. The first time it happened, I told myself it was just the old wiring, but the pattern was too deliberate, too regular. It happened again the next night and then again until curiosity got the better of me. One night, I lingered longer than usual, standing under the chandelier as the flickering began. It was hypnotic, and for a moment I lost track of time, my eyes tracing the path of the light as it danced. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the lights went out completely, plunging me into darkness. My heart skipped a beat and I froze, listening for any sound that might explain the blackout. My lantern's dim glow was the only light left, casting a weak circle in the inky blackness. Just as I was about to move, a soft creaking sound echoed through the corridor, a sound like the groan of old wood settling under pressure. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, my lantern raised high, but the corridor was empty. A cold breeze drifted past me, carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender, and the flickering resumed as if nothing had happened. I took a step back, a shiver running down my spine. Whatever was happening in this palace, it wasn't natural. I knew then that I had to find out what was behind the flickering lights, no matter the cost. What do you think is hidden behind these mysterious lights? Comment below. This is only the beginning. The flickering lights consumed my thoughts during the following nights, each one drawing me deeper into a mystery I couldn't explain. I started taking notes, recording the exact times the flickering occurred, mapping out the moments when the lights seemed to pulse as if in some kind of coded language. There was no obvious pattern, but I was convinced that the lights were trying to tell me something hidden beneath the polished surface of the palace. One cold night, I decided to stay past my shift. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. As the clock struck 3 a.m., the lights began their eerie dance once more, and I felt that familiar chill crawl down my spine. I followed the flickering down the corridor, my footsteps careful and light. There was a draft now, a cold wind that seemed to come from nowhere, and then I saw it, a door that had never been there before. It was a small, unassuming door, tucked away behind a tapestry that I had passed 100 times without noticing. My heart raced and I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, iron handle. It was locked. I fumbled with the heavy ring of keys at my belt, each one jangling like a death knell in the silent hall. None of them fit. I stepped back, frustration clawing at me when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely more than a breath, coming from the other side of the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The only answer was silence. The lights stopped flickering and the palace returned to its usual stillness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. I knew then that I needed help. Whatever was behind that door was beyond my understanding, and I couldn't face it alone. The next day, I sought out Marianne, a maid who had been at the palace for years. She was sharp, observant, and had a reputation for knowing things she shouldn't. I found her in the kitchens, her face lit by the glow of the hearth as she scrubbed the copper pots. "Marianne," I said, my voice low, "I need to ask you something." She looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's got you so rattled, David? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "Have you ever noticed anything strange about the palace at night?" Her expression changed, a flicker of understanding passing through her eyes. "Strange? This whole place is strange if you ask me. Secrets in every corner and the walls have eyes. Why do you ask?" I told her about the flickering lights, about the door that appeared out of nowhere. Her face grew serious and she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's an old story," she said, "about a door that only appears when the palace wants it to. They say it leads to a room where the royal family keeps their most dangerous secrets." "Secrets?" I asked, feeling a chill settle in my chest. "Secrets," she repeated. "Things they don't want the world to know. But if the doors appear to you, then it means you're already part of the story. Have you ever been pulled into a mystery you couldn't escape? Share your stories below. This one is just getting started? Marianne's words lingered in my mind like a chill that wouldn't fade. I returned to my duties that night, but everything felt different, heavier, like the very air in the palace was pressing down on me. The flickering lights had become more than a mystery. They were a summons, a call to uncover whatever lay behind that hidden door. The next night, I brought a lantern, extra oil, and a sturdy crowbar I had borrowed from the palace's maintenance room. I knew it was reckless, but my curiosity had turned into obsession, and I was determined to open that door. As the clock struck 3 a.m., I stood before the tapestry, my breath fogging in the cold air. The door was there just as I remembered, small, unassuming, and impossible to ignore. I pried at the edges with the crowbar, expecting resistance, but the wood gave way with a groan, and the door swung open with surprising ease. A narrow staircase wound down into darkness, the stone steps slick with moisture. My lantern's light barely pierced the gloom, but I didn't hesitate. I descended, each step feeling like a descent into another world, far from the opulence of the palace above. The air was damp and cold, filled with the scent of earth and something older, something musty and forgotten. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a long corridor, its walls lined with old portraits. The faces were blurred by dust and age, their expressions hidden beneath layers of neglect. But there was one portrait that caught my eye, a young woman with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at a buried memory. I reached out to brush the dust from the nameplate beneath the portrait, but before I could touch it, I heard a sound, a faint rhythmic tapping like someone knocking on wood. I spun around, holding my lantern high, but the corridor was empty. The sound continued, growing louder, echoing off the stone walls until it felt like it was coming from all directions. I backed away, the panic rising in my chest, and my heel caught on something hard. I stumbled, barely catching myself as my lantern's light fell on an object partially buried in the dirt floor. It was an old, rusted key, larger and heavier than any I'd ever seen, with strange symbols etched into the metal. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, the cold metal sending a shiver through me. I knew deep down that this key was connected to whatever lay deeper within the palace's bowels. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving me in silence. My breath was ragged, my pulse thundering in my ears. I forced myself to stand and move forward, my eyes fixed on the end of the corridor where a large, iron door loomed. It was covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the key, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the lantern's wavering light. My mouth went dry as I stepped closer, the key growing heavier in my hand. When I reached the door, I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. What lay beyond this threshold? I didn't know, but my instincts told me that opening this door would change everything. The thought of Marianne's warning echoed in my mind, but it was too late to turn back. I slid the key into the lock, feeling the ancient mechanism resist before it clicked open with a resounding thud. The door creaked open, revealing a vast, dimly lit chamber. The ceiling arched high above me, disappearing into darkness, and the walls were lined with towering shelves filled with old tomes, ledgers, and artifacts. It looked like a secret archive, a place where the palace's history had been carefully hidden away from prying eyes. My lantern's light danced across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. I stepped inside, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust, and I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I turned, my lantern's beam catching something metallic glinting in the corner of the room. It was a large chest, half hidden behind a stack of ancient books. The lid was engraved with the same symbols as the key, and my heart quickened. I approached the chest, feeling the tension in my muscles as I knelt before it. My hands shook as I lifted the heavy lid, and a rush of cold air escaped, sending a chill up my spine. Inside was a collection of documents and letters, tied together with faded red ribbon. But there, nestled among the papers, was a small ornate box. It was beautifully crafted, with delicate gold filigree and an ivory inlay that gleamed in the dim light. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cool surface, and a jolt of electricity shot through me. The air around me seemed to hum with energy, and I knew that whatever was inside this box was the key to unraveling the palace's secrets. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to stop, but the pull was too strong. I unlatched the box, lifting the lid, and my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a locket, a simple, silver pendant on a delicate chain. It looked ordinary, almost mundane, but I knew it was anything but. As I held it in my palm, the temperature dropped, and the room seemed to darken, as if the shadows themselves were pressing in. My hand tightened around the locket, and the world around me faded away. There was only darkness and the sound of my own breathing. Then a voice, a whisper so soft it was barely more than a breath, echoed in the chamber. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, but the chamber was empty. The voice seemed to come from the very walls, as if the palace itself was speaking to me. I backed away, the locket still clutched in my hand, and a strange compulsion seized me. I knew I had to get out, to leave the palace before whatever was hidden in those shadows found me. I turned and ran, the locket's chain tangling around my fingers, and the heavy door swung shut behind me with a deafening crash. The sound echoed through the corridors as I stumbled back up the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever I had unleashed, it wasn't going to rest until I found out the truth, or until it found me. Do you think I should keep digging, or have I already gone too far? Let me know if the truth is worth the danger. For days, the palace seemed to close in around me, its halls colder and more oppressive than ever before. I kept the locket hidden in my pocket, unable to part with it, even as I felt its weight like a stone around my neck. The flickering lights returned each night at 3 a.m., but they no longer seemed like a call. They were a warning. Marianne noticed my distraction. She had always been perceptive, and there was no hiding the change in me. She cornered me one afternoon in the servants' quarters, her eyes filled with concern. "David, what have you found?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "I can see it in your eyes. You're hiding something." I hesitated, feeling the locket burn against my skin, but I couldn't lie to her. "There's a room," I said slowly. "An archive hidden beneath the palace. And I found this." I pulled the locket from my pocket, holding it out for her to see. Marianne's eyes widened, and she reached for it, her fingers brushing mine as she took it. A strange expression crossed her face. Fear, recognition, and something else I couldn't place. "This belonged to her," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "To the princess who vanished?" "The princess?" I repeated, confusion clouding my thoughts. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, her face pale. "There was a scandal years ago before you and I were even born. A member of the royal family disappeared, along with a servant who was said to be her lover. They were never seen again, and the records of their existence were erased. But there were rumors, stories passed down by the old servants, stories of a secret lineage hidden to protect the family's honor." My blood ran cold, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. Why would I find her locket now? What does it mean? "I don't know," Marianne said, her voice shaking. "But if you found it, then you're part of this now. Whatever they've hidden, they don't want it to come to light. You need to be careful, David. This palace isn't safe for you anymore." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The locket seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and I knew that I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close to the truth. But I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. "Will you help me?" I asked, my voice raw with desperation. "I can't do this without you." Marianne hesitated, her gaze lingering on the locket before she looked up at me. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "But we have to be smart about this. We can't trust anyone." We spent the next few days in secret, poring over the documents I had taken from the archive. The more we read, the clearer the picture became. A web of lies and deceit that spanned generations, all centered around the royal family's desperate attempts to cover up a scandal that threatened their power. The missing princess was at the heart of it, and the locket was the key to unraveling it all. But the deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. We weren't the only ones searching for the truth. I began to notice strange figures lurking in the shadows, and the palace's atmosphere grew darker, heavier. The servants whispered of a curse, and I felt the walls closing in around us. Then one night, Marianne vanished. I waited for her in the hidden room we had claimed as our sanctuary, but she never came. Panic clawed at my chest, and I spent the night searching the palace, calling her name until my voice was hoarse. But she was gone, and the locket was the only clue I had left. Do you think the curse is real, or is this palace hiding something even more sinister? Share your thoughts as the story deepens. Marianne's disappearance felt like a knife to my chest, a wound that refused to heal. Days turned into weeks, and the palace's shadow seemed to stretch further with each passing hour. The flickering lights became erratic, no longer following the predictable rhythm that had drawn me in, and I felt the cold eyes of unseen watchers on me at every turn. I refused to give up, but the weight of my isolation was suffocating. I retraced every step, searching every corner of the palace where we had uncovered clues together. The locket never left my side, and I began to notice something strange. The silver pendant seemed to grow warmer whenever I neared certain parts of the palace. It was as if it was guiding me, pulling me towards something I couldn't yet understand. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside and the rain lashed against the stained glass windows, I returned to the underground archives, desperate for answers. The heavy door groaned as I pushed it open, and the stale air hit me like a wave. The dim glow of my lantern cast flickering shadows on the walls, and I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, a feeling that I was about to relive a moment that had happened long ago. The chest where I had found the locket still sat in the corner, and I knelt before it, hoping I had missed something. As I ran my fingers over the faded letters and fragile papers, I noticed a loose floor tile beneath the chest. My heart leaped and I pried it up, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, yellowed with age, covered in elegant, flowing script. It was a letter, a desperate, hurried note from the missing princess. She wrote of her forbidden love, of the child she bore in secret, and of the danger they faced from the family who would never allow their secret to be known. My breath caught in my throat as I read the final lines. If you are reading this, then my time has run out. I leave this to you, my last hope. Find him. Find the child and tell him the truth. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, and the weight of what I had stumbled upon crushed me. The child, the missing heir, could still be alive. I knew that the royal family would stop at nothing to keep that secret buried. I had to act quickly, but I had no idea where to begin. As I stood, clutching the letter to my chest, I felt a presence, a cold, oppressive force that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I spun around, and there, in the dim light of the archives, stood a figure cloaked in shadow. My lantern's light barely touched him, and I felt the weight of his gaze bore into me, freezing me in place. He moved closer, his footsteps silent, and I saw the flash of steel in his hand. Panic seized me and I ran, the letter clutched tightly in my fist. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my quarters, my chest heaving as I slammed the door shut behind me. I knew then that I was no longer hunting for the truth was hunting me. Is there any turning back when the hunter becomes the hunted? Your thoughts might be the key, share them below. I was on borrowed time. Every instinct told me to leave the palace, to disappear before it was too late. But something kept me anchored, a deep, unshakable sense of duty that drove me to uncover the truth. I couldn't abandon Marianne, and I couldn't ignore the princess's plea for justice. The walls of the palace felt like a trap, but the locket's warmth guided me, and I trusted it to lead me to the answers I so desperately sought. Days passed in a blur and my paranoia grew. Every shadow seemed to move, and every footstep echoed louder than it should. I had no allies, no one I could trust, until I found him. It was the dead of night, and I had retreated to the palace's gardens, seeking solace in the open air. As I walked the gravel paths, my eyes caught a figure hunched over near the old fountain, a man I recognized as Gregor, the palace's gardener. He was an older man, with graying hair and calloused hands, but there was a spark in his eyes that belied his age. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable, and I felt a jolt of recognition. There was something in his gaze that told me he knew everything. "I've seen you," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the wind. "Digging where you shouldn't be." I hesitated, but the exhaustion and fear overwhelmed my caution. "You know about the locket, don't you?" I asked, my voice breaking. Gregor nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know more than you think. This palace is a cage and you're rattling its bars. But if you're brave enough to keep going, I might be able to help." I sank onto the edge of the fountain, feeling a flicker of hope. "Why would you help me?" He looked away, his face lined with years of sorrow. "Because I loved her," he said simply, "the princess, and because I've lived with the guilt of knowing the truth for too long. It's time for it to end." Over the next few days, Gregor became my only confidant, and he told me the story that had haunted him for decades. He had been the princess's closest friend, her protector, and the one who had helped her hide the evidence of her forbidden love. But when the scandal broke, he had been powerless to stop the royal family's wrath. He had been forced to watch as they erased her from history, burying her memory and the child she had borne. "But the child survived," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's out there, isn't he?" Gregor nodded, his face grim. "Yes. But finding him won't be easy. The nobles will do anything to keep him hidden, and they're watching your every move." I looked down at the locket in my hand, feeling its familiar warmth. "I don't care what it takes," I said, my voice steady. "I have to find him. What would you do in my shoes? Would you risk everything for a truth that could destroy you?" Comment below as the search intensifies. Gregor and I spent the following weeks preparing for the most dangerous phase of our search. He told me of a hidden archive deep within the palace. an archive only accessible to the most trusted members of the royal family. It was there he believed that we would find the final clue to the missing heir's identity. But getting to it would be no easy task. We moved carefully, gathering supplies and waiting for the perfect moment. The palace was hosting a grand ball, a celebration of the Queen's birthday, and the halls would be filled with guests, servants, and nobility. It was the perfect cover, a night when the palace would be too distracted to notice our movements. As the sun set and the festivities began, I slipped away from the noise and laughter, my heart racing. Gregor had given me detailed instructions, and I followed them to the letter, moving through the hidden passages he had shown me. The walls were narrow and cold, and the sounds of the ball grew faint as I descended deeper into the palace's foundations. At last I reached the door to the hidden archive. It was massive, reinforced with iron and secured by a complicated lock that only the locket's key could open. My hands shook as I inserted the key, feeling the cold metal resist before giving way with a soft click. The door swung open and I stepped inside. The archive was a labyrinth of shelves, stretching out into darkness. Each shelf was filled with ledgers, scrolls, and records, centuries of secrets waiting to be uncovered. I moved quickly, my lantern's light guiding me as I searched for any clue, any sign that would lead me to the missing heir. Then, in the far corner of the room, I found it, a single leather-bound journal with the crest of the royal family emblazoned on the cover. My breath caught as I opened it, the pages filled with the princess's handwriting. It was her final confession, a record of everything she had hidden, everything she had sacrificed to protect her child. But before I could read more, a sound echoed through the archive, a low, menacing laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned, my lantern's light catching the glint of a blade in the darkness. The figure stepped forward and I knew without a doubt that I was not alone. What would you do if your every step was watched? This story isn't over. Join me for the next chapter. My breath froze in my lungs as the figure stepped out of the shadows, his face half hidden beneath a dark hood. He was tall and moved with a fluid grace that spoke of dangerous experience. The blade in his hand gleamed coldly in the lantern light, and I felt the weight of my own helplessness settle in my chest like a stone. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse with fear. The man said nothing, his eyes cold and calculating as they swept over me. Then he smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. "You should have left well enough alone," he said, his voice low and mocking. "This palace was never meant to be yours to understand." He lunged, and I barely had time to throw myself to the side, the blade slicing through the air where I had stood moments before. I stumbled, catching myself against a dusty shelf as the man advanced, his movements swift and sure. I knew I couldn't fight him. He was too skilled, too controlled. My only chance was to run. I turned and fled deeper into the archive, the darkness swallowing me as I ducked around shelves and vaulted over stacks of ancient scrolls. My lantern's light bobbed wildly, casting erratic shadows that seemed to chase me through the maze of records. The man's footsteps were close behind, and I could hear his breathing, calm and unhurried, as if he were toying with me. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I kept running, driven by a desperate need to escape. I rounded a corner and skidded to a halt, my eyes widening as I saw Gregor standing at the far end of the aisle. Relief washed over me and I ran toward him, my voice choked with panic. "Gregor, help?" But Gregor's expression was unreadable, his eyes hard and cold. He raised his hand and I saw a flicker of movement, a signal, and the hooded man stopped, lowering his blade with a slow, deliberate motion. Confusion flooded me and I stumbled to a halt, staring at Gregor in disbelief. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I thought you were on my side." Gregor's face twisted into a bitter smile. "There are no sides in this, David," he said. "Only survival. You should have listened when I told you to stop." I took a step back, my mind reeling. "You lied to me," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You were using me the whole time." "No," he said, his voice hard. "I was protecting you. You don't understand what's at stake here. If you continue down this path, you'll destroy everything." "Then why let me get this far?" I asked, my anger rising. "Why pretend to help me if you were just going to betray me in the end?" Gregor's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of regret. "Because I hoped you would be different," he said quietly. "I hoped you would stop before it was too late." He reached for me, his expression almost pleading, but I recoiled, the shock and betrayal burning hot in my chest. "I don't need your protection," I said, my voice raw with fury. "I need the truth." Before he could respond, I turned and ran, pushing past the hooded man who made no move to stop me. My heart pounded as I fled the archive, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. I didn't look back, didn't care if they were following me. I had what I needed, and nothing, no betrayal, no threat, would stop me from uncovering the truth now. What would you do if the one you trusted the most betrayed you? Tell me if you'd continue or walk away. The weight of Gregor's betrayal gnawed at me as I retreated to my quarters, the walls of the palace seeming colder and more oppressive than ever before. I couldn't believe that he had used me, had watched as I risked everything, only to try and stop me when I was so close to uncovering the truth. But I wouldn't let his betrayal break me. If anything, it made me more determined to see this through to the end. I spent the night poring over the princess's journal, reading her words in the dim light of my lantern. She had chronicled everything, the lies, the deceit, and the desperate measures she had taken to protect her child. Her words were raw and filled with sorrow, and I could feel her anguish bleeding through the pages. I knew now that the missing heir was the key to everything, and I had to find him before the nobles closed in on me. But time was running out. The palace was on high alert, and I felt the eyes of the guards on me wherever I went. I kept the journal hidden beneath the floorboards of my room, taking only a few pages with me at a time as I searched for any clue that might lead me to the missing heir. The locket was my guide, its warmth a constant reminder that I was not alone in this. Then, one cold winter's morning, as the snow fell softly outside the palace windows, I found it. A name hidden in the margins of the journal, written in a shaky, desperate hand. It was the name of a small, secluded village in the mountains, far from the reach of the palace's influence. I knew without a doubt that this was where the missing heir had been taken, where he had been hidden away from those who sought to erase him. But getting there would be no easy task. The palace's watchful eyes were everywhere, and I knew that if I left, they would follow. I had to create a distraction, something that would draw their attention away long enough for me to slip away unnoticed. It was then that I saw Marianne again. I was crossing the courtyard, my mind racing with plans, when I caught sight of her standing by the old oak tree, the very spot where we had first spoken of the palace's secrets. She looked pale and thinner than I remembered, her face drawn and weary. I hesitated, my heart aching at the sight of her, but I couldn't let her see the pain in my eyes. "Marianne," I said softly, my voice cracking. "Where have you been?" She looked up, her eyes dull and distant. "I had to disappear," she said, her voice hollow. "They took me, David. They wanted to make me forget everything, but I escaped. I came back for you." I felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by caution. "Why now?" I asked, my suspicion gnawing at me. "Why come back now when I'm so close?" She hesitated, her gaze shifting to the locket around my neck. "Because you're not safe," she said, her voice urgent. "Gregor and the others, they're planning something. They won't let you leave the palace alive. You have to trust me." I wanted to believe her, wanted to throw caution to the wind and trust that she was still the ally I had known. But the pain of Gregor's betrayal was still fresh, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her return than she was telling me. "Then help me," I said, my voice steady. "Help me create a distraction so I can find the heir." She nodded, her expression grim. "I'll do whatever it takes." We spent the next 2 days preparing, our movements careful and calculated. The tension between us was palpable, a fragile truce built on mutual desperation. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the unspoken questions that lingered between us, and I knew that trust was a luxury neither of us could afford. On the third night, as the snow continued to fall, we made our move. Would you trust her after everything that happened, or are some things too broken to repair? Your choice might change everything. The plan went off without a hitch, at first. Marianne and I set fire to one of the palace's abandoned wings, the flames roaring to life and drawing the guards away from the main halls. In the chaos, I slipped through the hidden passages, my heart racing as I made my way toward the stables. The journal's pages were tucked safely inside my coat, and the locket's warmth was a comforting presence against my chest. But just as I reached the stables, my escape route clear, I heard a shout, Gregor's voice calling my name. I froze, my breath hitching, and I turned to see him standing at the far end of the courtyard, his face twisted with fury. He was flanked by a group of guards, their eyes cold and unfeeling. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the snow-covered grounds. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Panic gripped me and I bolted, my boots crunching in the snow as I ran for the stables. The guards were on me in an instant, their shouts mingling with the roar of the fire as they closed in. I didn't look back, I couldn't. My only thought was of the village in the mountains, the missing heir who held the key to everything. I reached the stables, my hands fumbling as I saddled a horse, and I heard Marianne's voice calling my name from somewhere in the distance. I hesitated, my heart wrenching at the sound, but there was no time. I mounted the horse and urged it forward, the hooves thundering across the courtyard as I fled into the night. Behind me, I heard Gregor's voice one last time, a desperate, broken cry that cut through the darkness. "You'll never find him, David. You don't know what you're doing." But I didn't stop. The snow whipped around me, the cold biting into my skin as I rode into the storm, the palace's silhouette fading behind me. I was free to uncover the truth, free to follow the trail that would lead me to the heir, to the answers that had been buried for so long. But as I rode, the fear gnawed at me, the fear that I was being watched, that the shadows of the palace were not so easily left behind. What would you do if you had to flee everything you knew for the chance at the truth? Comment your thoughts. Our journey isn't over. The cold bit deep as I rode through the forest, the storm howling around me and obscuring my path. The snow fell in thick, swirling sheets, and I was half blind as the horse galloped over icy ground. My thoughts were a tangled web of fear and determination. Fear of what lay behind me and determination to uncover the truth that lay ahead. I rode for hours, the palace fading into the storm until it was nothing but a distant memory. My mind returned again and again to the journal's final clue, the name of the village hidden in the margins of those fragile pages. It was my only lead, the last thread connecting me to the vanished heir, and I clung to it like a lifeline. As dawn broke, the storm eased, and I found myself in a rugged, mountainous landscape. The village lay nestled in a deep valley, its rooftops covered in a blanket of snow. It looked isolated, untouched by the world beyond, and I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I dismounted, my body aching from the ride, and made my way toward the small cluster of houses. The villagers watched me with wary eyes as I approached, their faces half hidden beneath thick scarves and hoods. I asked quietly for the house mentioned in the journal, a name so unfamiliar, it seemed like a relic from a forgotten past. A few directed me with hesitant nods, and I soon stood before a small, unassuming cottage at the edge of the village, the roof sagging under the weight of the snow. I knocked, my knuckles numb with cold, and waited. Seconds passed, and then the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her 60s, her hair streaked with gray and her eyes tired but kind. She looked at me with a mix of recognition and apprehension, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. "You've come," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "I knew someone would come one day. Come inside quickly." I stepped into the warmth of the cottage, my senses overwhelmed by the smell of burning wood and herbs. The woman shut the door behind me, locking it tight, and motioned for me to sit by the fire. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "My name is Alara," she said, sitting across from me. "I was the princess's maid, the only one who knew her secret until she vanished. I've been waiting, guarding what she left behind, hoping that someone would come to finish what she started." My heart pounded, and I pulled the locket from beneath my coat, holding it out to her. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Alara's eyes widened, and she reached for the locket with trembling hands. "This belonged to her," she said, her voice breaking. "It was meant for her son, the child she loved more than anything. He was taken from her, hidden away to protect him from those who would use him as a pawn. Is he here?" I asked, leaning forward, my desperation bleeding into my words. "Is the missing heir still alive?" Alara hesitated, then nodded. "He is," she said, her voice firm. "But he is no longer a child. He has lived his life here, away from the palace, away from the lies. He knows nothing of his true heritage, only that he was sent here to be safe. But now that you are here, the truth cannot remain hidden any longer." I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. "Where is he?" She stood and gestured for me to follow her. "Come," she said, her expression solemn. "I will take you to him." What would you do if you were about to change someone's life forever? Share your thoughts as we step closer to the truth. We walked through the village, the snow crunching beneath our boots, until we reached a small, weathered cabin on the outskirts. Alara's face was grave as she knocked on the door, and a moment later, it was opened by a young man in his early 20s. He was tall and sturdy, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that mirrored the princess's, piercing with a depth that spoke of secrets long buried. "Alara," he said, his voice warm with familiarity, but his gaze shifted to me, his expression wary. "Who is this?" "This is David," Alara said, her voice steady. "He's come from the palace, bearing the truth of who you are." The young man's face paled, and he stepped back, shaking his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm no one, I've always been no one." I stepped forward, my heart in my throat. "You are not no one," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You are the heir to a legacy that was stolen from you, the son of a princess who sacrificed everything to keep you safe?" His eyes widened and he looked to Alara, who nodded slowly. "It's true," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. She gave you up so you would never have to live in the shadows of the palace, so you would be free." The young man staggered, his face crumpling with confusion and grief. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "This can't be true. I'm just a villager. I don't want any of this." I reached into my coat and pulled out the journal, holding it out to him. "Read this," I said. "It's her words, your mother's words. She left this for you so you would know the truth." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the journal as if it were a snake poised to strike, then snatched it from my hands. He opened the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to sorrow as he read. Tears streamed down his face and he looked up at me, his gaze burning with a fire I had never seen before. "Why now?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why after all this time? Why did she leave me?" "Because she loved you," I said, my own voice unsteady. "Because she wanted you to be free. But now the truth must come to light, no matter the cost." He closed the journal with trembling hands, his jaw clenched. "Then I will go," he said, his voice hardening. "I will return to the palace and face those who took everything from me. I will reclaim what is mine." Alara's eyes filled with tears and she reached out to touch his face. "Be careful," she whispered. "The palace is not what it seems, and the people who rule it will do anything to protect their secrets." He looked at me, his expression resolute. "Will you come with me?" he asked. "Will you help me bring the truth to light?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of his words, but I knew my answer even before I spoke. "Yes," I said, my voice strong. "I will stand by your side no matter what comes." "Would you stand by him and face the consequences, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts as we prepare for the final confrontation." We left the village at dawn, the sun casting a golden light over the snow-covered landscape as we began our journey back to the palace. The young man, now the rightful heir, was silent, his face set in a mask of determination, the weight of his newfound identity heavy on his shoulders. Alara embraced him one last time, her eyes filled with pride and sorrow, and I saw the way her hands trembled as she let him go. The ride was long and the cold cut through us like a knife, but we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was the endgame. The palace loomed in the distance, its towers rising like dark sentinels against the sky, and I felt the familiar sense of dread settle in my gut. The heir's presence at my side was a constant reminder that everything was about to change. We arrived under the cover of night, slipping through the hidden passageways that Gregor had shown me so long ago. The palace was silent, the halls dark and empty, but I knew that the shadows were watching, waiting for the moment to strike. We made our way to the grand hall, the heart of the palace's power, and there, standing in the center, was Gregor. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and I knew that he had been waiting for us. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice broken. The heir stepped forward, his chin raised defiantly. "I have every right to be here," he said, his voice strong. "This is my birthright." Gregor's gaze flickered to me and I saw the pain in his eyes, the regret of a man who had lost everything. "Do you think the truth will set you free?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you think the palace will let you walk away with its secrets?" The heir's eyes blazed and he reached for the locket around his neck, the same locket that had led me to him. "I don't care," he said. "I will bring the truth to light, no matter the cost." Gregor's shoulders sagged and he looked down, his face twisted with grief. "Then may God have mercy on your soul," he said. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and I turned to see the nobles, the true power behind the throne, emerging from the shadows, their faces cold and unfeeling. The final confrontation had begun. Would you face the powerful to reveal the truth, or would you retreat in fear? Comment your choice as we reach the climax of our journey. The grand hall was filled with a silence so profound that it pressed against my ears, amplifying the echo of each step the nobles took as they encircled us. Their faces, illuminated by the dim glow of the chandelier above, were masks of disdain and arrogance. The young heir stood firm at my side, his eyes blazing with defiance. Gregor remained in the shadows, his face a portrait of grief and regret, as if he were witnessing the unfolding of a tragedy he had tried and failed to prevent. "You are a fool," one of the nobles, a tall, gaunt man with a thin mustache, said coldly, addressing the heir. "You should have remained in obscurity as your mother intended. You know nothing of the world you seek to reclaim." "I know enough," the heir replied, his voice steady. "I know that my mother's life was stolen from her. I know that you buried her legacy to protect your own power. and I know that I am her son, the rightful heir to this palace." The gaunt man's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Instead, another noble, a woman with cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward, her lips curling in a mocking smile. "What do you hope to gain from this display, boy?" she asked. "You are alone, a pretender with no proof, no support. The people will never follow you." I felt a surge of anger and I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the tension. "He is not alone," I said. "He has the truth and the truth will be enough." The woman's eyes narrowed and she looked to Gregor, who stood silently at the edge of the room, his face pale. "Is this true, Gregor?" she asked, her voice laced with venom. "Did you betray us for this boy and his fool's errand?" Gregor's gaze flickered to me, and I saw the war raging in his eyes, the battle between loyalty and regret. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging, and stepped forward. "I did," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've been a coward for too long. I watched as you destroyed the lives of those who stood in your way, and I can't do it anymore. The boy speaks the truth. He is the son of the princess, and he has every right to be here." The nobles' faces twisted with fury, and a low murmur rippled through the room. I felt the tension building like a storm gathering strength, and I knew that we were at the edge of a precipice. The heir took another step forward, his voice rising with conviction. "I am not here to take the throne," he said. "I am here to reveal the truth, to show the world what you did to my mother, to expose the lies that you have woven for generations. You may hate me, you may fight me, but you will not silence me." He reached into his coat and pulled out the journal, the princess's final confession, and held it high for all to see. The room fell deathly silent, and the nobles' faces paled as if they had seen a ghost. The heir's voice echoed through the hall, clear and unwavering. "This is the truth," he said. "This is my mother's legacy, and it will not be buried any longer. Would you stand in his place and challenge the powerful, even if it meant risking everything? Comment your thoughts as the confrontation reaches its peak." The nobles moved as one, their faces masks of fury and fear. The gaunt man lunged forward, his hand reaching for the journal, but the heir stepped back, his eyes blazing with a determination that left no room for doubt. I watched in awe as he stood his ground, his presence commanding and fierce, and I knew in that moment that he was no longer the frightened boy I had met in the mountains. He was the heir, and he was ready to claim his birthright. The noblewoman's voice was a hiss, sharp and venomous. "You will regret this," she spat. "You are a threat to everything we have built. You will not leave this palace alive." The tension snapped and chaos erupted. The guards, who had been watching from the shadows, surged forward, their swords drawn, but Gregor stepped into their path, his voice a roar that echoed through the grand hall. "Stop. If you value your honor, stand down." The guards hesitated, their loyalty torn between the nobles who had ruled them and the man who had once been their comrade. I saw the confusion in their eyes, the fear, and I knew that we had only moments before violence erupted. The heir's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Listen to me," he shouted, his voice commanding. "You are not my enemies. I am not here to take power, I am here to set things right. This palace is not yours. It belongs to the people, to the history that you have tried to erase." The guards wavered, and the nobles' faces twisted with fury. The gaunt man's hand twitched toward his sword, and I saw the decision flash in his eyes, the choice to strike, to silence the heir before the truth could take root. But I was faster. I stepped between the heir and the gaunt man, my own blade flashing in the dim light. "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "If you want to kill him, you'll have to go through me." For a moment the world seemed to freeze. The gaunt man's eyes locked onto mine, filled with cold hatred, but I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, slowly, he lowered his sword, the fury draining from his face as he realized that he had lost. The heir stepped forward, his voice calm and clear. "This is over," he said. "The lies, the deceit, it ends now. I will not allow you to take what is not yours. The people will know the truth, and you will answer for what you have done." The noblewoman's face was a mask of rage, but she said nothing. One by one, the nobles retreated, their power crumbling in the face of the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The guards lowered their weapons, their expressions uncertain, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me, a relief tempered by the knowledge that the fight was not yet over. Have you ever stood up for something you believed in even when the odds were against you? Share your story as we enter the final moments of this journey. The palace was silent in the days that followed, the kind of silence that comes after a great storm has passed. The nobles were gone, their power broken, and the truth of the princess's legacy spread through the kingdom like wildfire. The journal's contents were copied and shared, and the people who had been oppressed for so long began to find their voices, their courage, and their hope. I watched as the heir took his place, not as a ruler but as a symbol, a beacon of truth and justice in a world that had long been shrouded in lies. He did not seek the throne as he had promised, but he became a leader nonetheless, a figure who stood for the ideals his mother had died to protect. The palace, once a place of shadows and secrets, became a place of light, open to all who sought knowledge and understanding. Gregor vanished, his fate unknown, but I hoped he had found some measure of peace, away from the palace that had taken so much from him. Marianne remained by the heir's side, her strength and wisdom a source of guidance in the uncertain days ahead. I saw the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, and I knew that she, too, had found her place in the new world that was being born. As for me, I left the palace behind. The secrets I had uncovered had cost me dearly, but they had also given me something I had never expected. A sense of purpose, a belief that the truth was worth fighting for no matter the cost. I wandered the kingdom, sharing the story of the princess and her son, the story of the palace that had been brought to its knees by the power of truth. And one day, as I stood on a hill overlooking the palace, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The world had changed, and I had been a part of that change, a part of something greater than myself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the locket that had started it all, and held it up to the light. It was no longer warm, no longer a burden. It was a symbol of what had been lost and what had been found. I placed it on the ground, burying it beneath the soil, and turned away, my heart light and free. The past was behind me, and the future lay open, waiting to be written. Would you have made the same choices, or would you have walked away? Share your thoughts as we close this chapter.